Animação para exportação, e vai também servir de mediador para a mesa e apresentar os nossos outros convidados. Então, queria chamar para o palco aqui Reinaldo Marquezini.
Boa tarde. Está funcionando bem aqui? O título é Animação para Exportação, então o foco, realmente, a gente vai falar muito dessa parte do negócio da animação, mas antes de eu começar a falar minha parte, eu gostaria de convidar os outros membros da mesa e aproveitar para que eles possam acompanhar essa introdução, que eu vou dar uma perspectiva do que aconteceu no Brasil, o que eu acho que deve acontecer no Brasil nos próximos anos. E eu quero que eles aproveitem para ouvir e, inclusive, depois compartilhar a experiência deles com essa perspectiva, tá bom? Então, I'd like to invite Kevin Geiger to the table. O Kevin é presidente da Magic Dumpling Entertainment, mais de 15 anos de experiência no mercado de animação. Né? Ele trabalhou na Disney, trabalhou em longas e está na China agora. Então, também é uma pessoa que tem essa experiência de ir para um mercado emergente. E a gente vai aproveitar para... queria chamar a Wen Fong. Se eu falei certo. A Wen também é vice-presidente da Magic Dumpling, animadora, fez vários curtas-metragens. E a Becky Bristol, please, que é animadora, diretora, produtora, né? Trabalha hoje na Mattel, com animação para a Mattel. Também vai compartilhar com nós a experiência dela. Thank you, Becky. Bem, agora que estão todos na mesa, eu queria aproveitar, falar que é muito bom sempre vir para o Anima Mundi, né? A gente costuma ir para o MIP, com o Kid Screen, para outras feiras lá no exterior, mas como é bom ver um monte de criança no saguão, vendo animação e brincando com animação, e isso dá uma energia diferente, principalmente no meu caso, que a Flama é focada em animação para crianças, né? A gente trabalha só com um público de 3 a 15 anos, então é bom não só ver executivos e produtores executivos, mas ver o nosso público realmente apaixonado pela animação. Então isso me fez um bem danado antes de vir para a mesa, cruzar com essas crianças, né? Agradecer o convite do César. Eu vou falar da importância do Anima Mundi, do Kid Screen, do Anima TV e de outras iniciativas que eu acho que estão fazendo uma mudança importante no cenário da animação brasileira. O formato desse painel, só para vocês entenderem, a ideia é cada um falar durante mais ou menos uns 20 minutos, então a gente vai fazer uma apresentação individual, cada um, para posicionar, falar um pouco da experiência. Vai ter uma sessão de perguntas que eu vou colocar para eles responderem e, de repente, eles têm uma perspectiva complementar. E, no final, uma coisa que eu sou muito contra os painéis que não têm perguntas da plateia, né? E insisto e acho muito importante, no final, a gente reservou um bom tempo para que vocês façam as perguntas, é muito importante. Só para eu ter uma ideia, quem aqui é animador na plateia? Então, olha quantos animadores temos aí. Produtores, que pode ser os dois, né? Pode levantar animador, produtor executivo, line producer, né? Produtores também. No Brasil isso é muito comum, né? E estudantes, quem são estudantes aqui? Também temos vários estudantes. E é muito bom ter estudantes em painéis de negócio, porque a animação, como produto e como indústria, que a gente fala, precisa ter essa visão de negócio, é uma das coisas que mais o Brasil precisa desenvolver. A minha apresentação, que eu começo agora, é para dar uma perspectiva um pouco de como é o cenário da animação brasileira hoje. E o César mencionou dos relatórios, né, dos Animas Mundis passados, César, e eu fui lá dar uma recapitulada, ver o que eu tinha falado no Anima Mundi de 2007. E 2007 foi o ano em que, um ano antes de Princesas do Mar estrear na Discovery Kids, a Princesas do Mar estreou em março de 2008. Né? Então, é legal porque lá falava sobre qual era a expectativa, o que ia acontecer, né, na animação, e estava começando a se falar de Princesas do Mar, do Peixonauta. E agora a gente já está no momento que a gente pode começar a fazer uma análise dessas primeiras séries, até compartilhar com vocês os acertos e, principalmente, compartilhar os erros, né, que eu acho que essa é uma grande vantagem de escutar os cases anteriores, né? E acho que o painel de hoje vai falar bem, legal, a gente já quebrou essa primeira barreira de o Brasil é capaz de produzir séries de animação para televisão, fazer coprodução. E agora, o que a gente vai ter que fazer para manter e crescer e desenvolver esse mercado? Então, esse é o foco desse painel. O César fez uma apresentação sobre mim, mas, para quem não me conhece, eu montei a Flama, eu fundei a Flama em 2004. Durante 9 anos antes da Flama, eu trabalhei para estúdios estrangeiros, ou na parte de distribuição ou na parte de licenciamento. Então, eu trabalhei para a Disney, para a BBC, para a Nelvana, para a Nintendo, né? E, em 2004, eu resolvi falar, não, ok, vender essas séries dos estrangeiros aqui é bacana, eu sempre gostei disso, mas eu queria estar muito mais envolvido com a criação do conteúdo desde o começo. Então, a Flama nasceu dessa vontade. Ela tem um propósito muito claro, no sentido de que tipo de conteúdo ela quer desenvolver. É um conteúdo para criança e para jovem, que leve alguma coisa além do entretenimento. Pelo menos é a minha crença de como eu vejo o conteúdo audiovisual infantil, né? Bem, a gente fala de exportar, né? Mas o que acontece? Então, para dar uns dados para vocês de Princesas do Mar. Princesas do Mar é a primeira coprodução de uma ideia brasileira transformada em série de animação. É uma coprodução entre a Flama do Brasil, a Southern Star da Austrália e a Neptuno, que é um estúdio de animação da Espanha. Foram produzidas 2 temporadas de 52 episódios de 11 minutos, né, um total de 104 episódios. Um orçamento, já que a gente vai falar de números e de negócio, né, e é importante para quando a gente fala por que a gente precisa exportar a animação, porque a série custa, cada temporada, 7 milhões de dólares. Então, 14 milhões de dólares para produzir essa série. E, na hora que vocês vão tentar vender para os canais aqui no Brasil, vocês vão ver que não dá para fechar essa conta só aqui. Aliás, isso não é só para nós, isso é para a grande maioria dos países. Você tem que pensar a animação como um negócio global mesmo. A recuperação desse investimento tem que vir da venda para a TV a cabo, para a TV aberta, para home video, para licenciamento, né, as várias janelas do produto, e não apenas num único país, mas em vários países. Hoje, né, César, lá a gente falava, puxa, como que será que vai ser, quem é que a gente vai atingir, né? Hoje, Princesas do Mar foi vendido para 128 países. Então, eu acho que isso é muito legal e muito importante, porque a gente fala de animação para exportação. Então, o motivo racional de exportar animação não dá para pagar os custos vendendo para um único país. Mas o motivo emocional é que a gente, na verdade, quer contar a nossa história para o maior número possível de pessoas, né? Então, a gente fica muito feliz de saber que tem 128 países, né, crianças de nacionalidades muito diferentes assistindo e escutando as nossas histórias das Princesas do Mar, que tratam sobre diversidade, sobre ecologia, né? Eu sempre cito, não a venda mais importante em termos de receita, mas o fato de estar no canal educativo em Israel e estar na Al Jazeera, no Oriente Médio. Então, isso sempre é interessante a gente ver que a mensagem chega para essas crianças em vários países, né? É uma série que foi feita uma pré-venda. Para quem não sabe, a pré-venda é quando, antes da produção da série, você consegue vender para um canal de televisão. Então, um canal de televisão está disposto a pôr o dinheiro antes da série ser produzida. Isso é muito bom, porque é parte do dinheiro que entra, porque a gente chama do funding, o financiamento da série. Mas para esses canais também é importante, porque eles também dão opinião editorial na série antes dela ser produzida, né? E eu imagino, eu estou mencionando muito isso, porque eu acho que no Brasil o que está faltando e que provavelmente vai começar a acontecer é a TV aberta começar a participar mais desse processo, dela começar a arriscar mais nos projetos antes deles serem feitos, né? A nossa televisão está muito acostumada a comprar séries já prontas, porque foi assim que elas compraram a animação dos outros países. Agora, pré-comprar uma série significa desenvolver uma competência, uma experiência de avaliar projetos e de começar a construir. Um outro projeto que a Flama está envolvido é a animação do Sítio do Pica-Pau Amarelo, né? Então, esse é talvez um case importante, porque é a primeira vez que a gente tem a Rede Globo, né, produzindo uma série de animação através de a produção independente. Então, eu costumo dizer isso, né? A Mixer é a produtora, a 2D Lab é o estúdio que faz a animação, a Flama faz a supervisão de arte e a consultoria. É um momento muito importante, porque se a gente conseguir mostrar para o mercado, no caso para a Globo, que é a principal, isso vai repercutir nas outras, mostrando, olha, o caminho da TV aberta brasileira, ter animação, ter conteúdo infantil, é através da produção independente. Porque a gente quebra esse modelo do Brasil de que o canal de TV tem que produzir absolutamente tudo, o noticiário, a novela, o esporte, né? E a gente, se quer crescer como indústria de animação, e a gente usa muito o Canadá como referência, a gente precisa de produção independente. E produção independente não é só boa por causa disso, mas também porque areja, dá diversidade de ideias, de estilos, de linguagem, e eu acho que isso todo mundo sai ganhando. Então, esse é um pouco das informações de Princesas do Mar, né, para dizer, olha, de 2007, a gente falava de uma série que ia estrear em 2008. E em 2011, a gente está falando, chegamos em 128 países, a gente tem 190 produtos licenciados, o licenciamento é um componente muito importante, inclusive, talvez os colegas vão dizer a importância que isso está tendo para financiar séries, porque a oferta de recursos para financiar séries no mundo, em alguns países, diminuiu e devido à crise econômica. Então, vai ser interessante a gente também discutir como é que os países estão falando sobre financiar a série e quem financia está investindo e quem está investindo quer retorno, né? Estou vendo que o Arnaldo está aqui na sala. Arnaldo, eu aproveitei os seus dados aqui, viu? O Arnaldo é um grande pesquisador da animação brasileira. E, às vezes, a gente esquece de... Se a gente pegar uma listinha de cinema de animação brasileira, né, Arnaldo? A gente vai, puxa, a gente já tem alguns filmes de animação. Às vezes a gente lembra de 2 ou 3, mas a listinha já é maior. E quando a gente vai para a tela das séries de televisão, também a gente já tem uma listinha considerável, né? E aqui tem algumas imagens, né, do Amigãozão, My Big Big Friend, o nome em inglês, Escola para Cachorro, Peixonauta, o Tromba-Trem, né? Não sei se tem alguém da Cop Studio aqui. Tem alguém da Cop Studio? Não tem ninguém dos nossos amigos da Cop Studio. O Carrapatos e Catapultas, que são 2 séries que foram as ganhadoras do Anima TV, que também é uma outra iniciativa muito importante para a animação brasileira. Então, isso mostra que o Brasil quebrou aquela barreira inicial que a gente falava 4 anos atrás nos Anima Mundi. Quando é que o Brasil vai transformar a animação em indústria? Eu sempre reforço que o aspecto que a gente está olhando é a indústria aqui, porque eu acredito que a animação, como manifestação artística, ela tem várias possibilidades. Mas a conversa aqui é, se o Brasil quer ter empresas, animadores, profissionais envolvidos com a animação, como nós vamos estruturar essa indústria no início? E fazer essas escolhas no início é muito mais importante do que tentar reajustar depois, que, na minha opinião, é o caso de alguns outros países, talvez eles vão confirmar ou discordar do que eu estou falando, países que se posicionaram como uma venda de mão de obra de animação e agora tentam dizer, nós somos países que criamos conteúdo. Eles já estão, de certa forma, marcados como um país de grande força de produção, mas não são tão vistos como criação de conteúdo. E nós ainda não somos vistos nem muito como um, nem muito como o outro, o que pode ser uma desvantagem, mas pode ser uma oportunidade. E a oportunidade, eu costumo dizer, qual é a escolha que a gente quer fazer? Como a gente quer ser visto como um player no mercado internacional de animação? As empresas que criam suas ideias próprias são as que têm o maior retorno, porque você fica com a propriedade intelectual. Porém, é um pouco o que todo mundo está querendo fazer hoje em dia, em vários países. Acredito que o Kevin vai falar sobre isso na China, a criação do conteúdo local que quer ir para o outro território, para o outro país. Então, por um lado, é uma oportunidade, por outro, é esse desafio de como se mostrar para o mercado internacional que nós somos capazes e temos essa competência instalada. O fato dessas séries, Princesas do Mar, Amigãozão, Escola para Cachorro, elas começam a mostrar o que eu chamo de track record. E isso é muito importante lá fora, quando você vai fazer o pitching, você começar a falar, mas eu já fiz isso, mas o Brasil já fez essas séries. Então, mostra que a gente já passou por uma experiência diferente da animação publicitária, que eu acho que é a grande maioria dos casos, né? Eu lembro quando eu estava pesquisando para montar a Flama, eu fui visitar vários estúdios de animação. E 99% viviam de publicidade, fazer animação para publicidade. A questão não tem nada errado com isso, mas fazer 30 segundos de animação é muito diferente de fazer 52 episódios de 11. E aí a gente está falando de processo, está falando de gestão, que são coisas que a gente vai falar um pouquinho aqui, né? o Brasil, e isso também é importante para os meus colegas aqui na mesa entenderem, a viabilidade, a forma como a gente está estruturando, tornar as séries de animação possíveis, ainda está muito baseada no que a gente chama do fomento e no incentivo de mecanismos fiscais que o governo dá. Isso é muito importante e tem que continuar, né? A gente tem as leis de incentivo, a gente tem agora uma questão da PL 116, para quem não sabe, é uma discussão no Congresso e no Senado, se as TVs a cabos devem ter uma cota obrigatória de produção independente brasileira, e toda vez que é mencionado cota, é sempre um assunto polêmico, né, porque vem questão se é o mérito ou é a obrigação, mas eu costumo lembrar que todos os países que a gente conversa muito e que são fortes em animação, eles têm os seus mecanismos de proteção e de incentivo, né? A própria Princesas do Mar, pelo fato de ter o estúdio da Netuno como um dos coprodutores, ela é considerada conteúdo europeu. E isso foi decisivo para fazer uma pré-venda para a Kika, que é um canal da Alemanha. Então, isso talvez no futuro também seja importante para parceiros que queiram entrar aqui, se associar com produtores locais. Então, nosso mercado ainda precisa equilibrar essa oferta e essa demanda. O Anima TV, que é um programa que eu considero um sucesso em vários aspectos, como qualquer case inicial tem os seus, poderia ser melhorado, mas o grande mérito é 18 empresas, autores que se associaram a produtores, fizeram pilotos, e dois, né, o Carrapatos e Catapultas e o Trombatrem, produziram 13 episódios, né, então passaram por essa experiência de produzir uma série. Então é um programa que realmente eu acho que a gente deveria tentar ter mais desses modelos, né. O apoio da PEX, no caso da exportação, eu vou falar para vocês, é muito importante a presença nas feiras internacionais, é muito importante ir para um MIPCOM, para um Kid Screen, né? E o programa Brazilian TV Producers, da BPI, tem dado esse apoio para muitos produtores independentes, que permitem eles irem ao Kid Screen, ao MIPCOM, e isso é fundamental para a gente mostrar nossa cara, estar lá todos os anos e as pessoas começarem a ter o contato, conhecer e criar o relacionamento. O que eu acho que, falando agora de animação brasileira, qual é o próximo estágio? Uma das coisas que eu sinto é a falta do investidor na empresa. A gente tem uma herança do cinema, do investimento e da lei de incentivo para o projeto, o longa-metragem, aquele filme. Então, o projeto é visto como o angariador de recursos. Eu imagino que o próximo estágio é essas empresas de animação terem investidores com dinheiro, né, de venture capital, capital de risco, né, na empresa, não num único projeto, porque senão a empresa fica toda hora dependendo, puxa, mas e se o meu próximo projeto não emplacar? E a curva de tempo, como vocês podem ter percebido em Princesas do Mar, é muito longa. Eu fiz o pitching no MIPCOM de 2004, consegui, no mês seguinte, o que é uma exceção, um option agreement, que é um contrato de opção, onde o produtor e os coprodutores falam, vamos tentar levantar o dinheiro para produzir a série. Era um option de 2 anos, o que é relativamente padrão no mercado. Levou 1 ano e 5 meses para levantar os primeiros 7 milhões de dólares para produzir a série. 18 meses para produzir a temporada. Então, vamos fazendo a conta, vocês vão vendo o tempo que isso leva, né? De fazer o pitching, conseguir o contrato, levantar o dinheiro, produzir a série, vender. E agora, em 2011, o pitching foi em 2004. Agora, em 2011, é que a gente está em 128 países. Mas uma empresa, para sobreviver e desse tempo de um projeto, não pode, ela tem que ter outros recursos. E a gente vai falar sobre isso. O que um estúdio faz para se manter nesse período? Ele tem atividades paralelas, ele tem uma escola de animação, ele faz publicidade, como é que ele se mantém? A gente vai falar sobre isso. Coprodução nacional, né? Eu mencionei o caso do City, eu acho que agora essas empresas vão... Eu gostaria muito, pelo menos eu tenho esse desejo, que comecem a surgir as primeiras coproduções nacionais. A gente fala muito da coprodução internacional, que faz sentido, pegar experiência, complementariedade, distribuição, mas se a gente quer se desenvolver como indústria, também isso é um ponto importante. E a questão da comercialização, né, que é o assunto principal, bem, como é que eu exporto essa série, né? Aqui eu até coloco, cadê as TVs abertas, né? A gente fala de exportar, mas também tem que vender para a TV. Aliás, é muito comum, porque a gente escuta nessas feiras, mas espera aí, como é que seu projeto não tem um canal do Brasil ainda junto dele. Porque lá fora é quase uma coisa inconcebível um estúdio, uma produtora ter um projeto que não está sendo apoiado, ou tem um canal de TV que diz, nossa, eu estou interessado, vai atrás de parceiros, vão coproduzir. Quando a gente chega lá e fala, não, o pessoal lá ainda não sabe, não tá, porque a gente não tem essa cultura da TV, do canal de TV aberta, entrar, arriscar mais, né? E eu espero e acredito que isso vai começar a acontecer mais, né? Bem, exportação, né? Quando a gente fala exportação, dá uma sensação de que, bem, primeiro eu faço o produto e depois eu vou exportar. Pode até acontecer, mas no caso da animação isso é praticamente uma exceção. Você tem que ter esse pensamento de exportação desde o começo. Na verdade, quando você se junta com um canadense ou um australiano, você já está pensando nessa estratégia de exportação. A gente pode falar, uma das questões aí, o conteúdo, aquela velha discussão, o conteúdo é local, mas tem que ser um tema universal, que é uma discussão, né, também que costuma surgir muito nesse tipo de painel, né? Realmente, eu acredito que, como indústria, a gente tem que pensar num produto que seja exportável, ou seja, que ele seja compreendido e absorvido por plateias de outros países. Isso não quer dizer que elimina o nosso conteúdo brasileiro, né? Mas a gente tem que achar um jeito de contar essa história de uma forma que outras plateias possam absorver, né? Acho que esse é um outro tema que a gente vai falar aqui. A rede de relacionamentos é absolutamente fundamental. Eu fiz os 25 pitchings de Princesas do Mar no MIPCOM, mas por causa dos meus 9 anos trabalhando para esses estúdios, eu sabia com quem me reunir e para quem eu devia mostrar aquele projeto. E olha que eu mostrei para 25. Desses 25, 4 fizeram propostas e eu acabei fechando com os australianos. Mas tenho certeza absoluta que o fato de conhecer as pessoas, conhecer as empresas, fez muita diferença. Então, para aqueles produtores que estão pensando, né, na animação como indústria e como negócio de longo prazo, absolutamente fundamental essa rede de relacionamento. E aproveitar para conhecer as pessoas quando elas vêm para cá, porque eles também são pontes de relacionamento, eles também são pessoas que conhecem e fazem essas conexões. E nesse negócio é absolutamente fundamental, na minha opinião. O track record foi até um dos problemas que eu tive, porque quando eu fiz o pitching de Princesas do Mar, os australianos viraram e falaram assim, espera aí, mas onde você vai fazer a animação das Princesas do Mar? Ah, eu quero fazer no Brasil. Ah, é? Quantas séries o Brasil já animou? 52 episódios? Nenhum. Então, não consegui vender o Brasil como local de produção de animação. Felizmente, o Kiko e depois o André, né, conseguiram fazer uma animação realmente com o pé aqui no Brasil, e é o que eu realmente desejo, mas acredito que isso não tem que ser uma regra. Eu acho que, para a gente desenvolver a indústria, tem que ter essa complementaridade, né? Hoje, a gente começa a construir esse track record. Então, quando a gente tem um stand do Brasil no MIPCOM, a gente começa a mostrar as séries que já foram feitas. E isso ajuda a todos, né? O André, eu gosto muito também da presença do André nesses painéis, porque a gente realmente quer levantar todo mundo. Aquela história meio manjada da maré que sobe, todos os barcos sobem, a gente acredita muito nisso, né? A gente realmente quer que a animação brasileira cresça em vários sentidos. Informação é absolutamente fundamental. Você tem que conhecer os broadcasters, os canais de TV, você tem que conhecer para quem você vai conversar, que tipo de animação, que tipo de estilo, o que aquele canal exibe. Entra no site, vê a programação. Nunca faça um pitching de um programa para um canal que não tem nada a ver com o seu produto, senão você queima a sua imagem, né? E talvez, lembra que eu falei a história de qual é o aprendizado das coisas certas e das coisas erradas. Talvez o maior aprendizado do que eu acho que a Flama teve e que eu quero compartilhar, assim, não pensem numa fila indiana de projetos. Eu sei que é difícil, porque muitas vezes as empresas são pequenas, as equipes são restritas, e muita energia é colocada num projeto até que ele realmente dê certo. E aí você fica com aquela sensação, bem, enquanto esse não der certo, eu não vou desenvolver nenhum outro. E, para mim, esse é o erro que eu acho que a gente fez e que a gente está corrigindo agora. Tem que ter vários projetos ao mesmo tempo, em estágios diferentes de desenvolvimento. Porque, senão, você pode levar um e, na verdade, o outro projeto acaba tendo uma apresentação, ou você faz um pitching daquele que você não acreditava tanto e ele acaba indo para frente. E a gente está num estágio que a gente precisa fazer a máquina rodar, precisa fazer os projetos acontecerem. O que eu acho que a animação brasileira precisa como próximos passos? São 3 coisas. Amadurecer, a questão de gerir, a questão de gestão, e a diversidade, diversificar, né? Quando eu falo amadurecer, a gente tem falado muito, né, em vários painéis, a história da capacitação, né, César? Isso surge muito forte. E, normalmente, quando a gente fala capacitação da animação, a gente pensa em capacitar mais animadores. Precisa capacitar mais animadores? Precisa. Mas eu acho que a gente precisa capacitar mais roteirista, line producer, produtor executivo, porque senão a gente não cria essa indústria. A indústria da animação não é feita só de animadores. Claro, o animador é a peça central, que dá vida a essa arte. Mas se a gente está falando de negócio, ele é um trabalho coletivo. E se a gente está falando que o Brasil quer se posicionar como um criador de suas ideias, a gente precisa ter roteiristas. Senão a gente vai sentar com os canadenses e vai falar, vocês não têm bom roteirista, é um roteirista canadense aqui. E a gente não consegue contar as nossas histórias. Né? Então, eu defendo muito que o Brasil precisa criar mais e desenvolver mais roteiristas com experiência em animação e infantil. Se a gente capacitar essa turma toda, a gente vai ter mais experiência no mercado, pessoas com mais experiência. E essa experiência ela tem que ser compartilhada de volta. Por isso que o Anima Mundi é tão importante, por isso que o Anima TV é tão importante, né? Eu participei no Anima TV dando a oficina de comercialização, e eu acho que a gente tem que dar de volta para o mercado. A gente só cria, aliás, eu acho que isso no Brasil precisa ser desenvolvido não só na animação, né? Essa coisa de devolver para o mercado. Né? A gente aprender, conquistar, mas compartilhar e devolver. E eu acho que, felizmente, os animadores, de forma geral, têm essa coisa positiva. Eu sinto essa boa vontade entre os animadores. Né? Então, eu acho que isso é uma coisa que a gente, compartilhando, a gente capacita mais pessoas e assim por diante, esse amadurecimento cresce. Eu falei da questão dos investidores. As empresas precisam de investidores. Tudo bem, nem todo mundo vai ter o Steve Jobs como investidor anjo no seu estúdio de animação. Né? Eu adoraria, mas se a gente começar a ter essa cultura do investidor no negócio, na empresa, realmente o nosso negócio vai chegar num outro patamar. E eu estou muito curioso para ouvir dos meus colegas como que é essa questão nos outros países. Como é que um negócio que você faz um pitch em 2004 e ele só chega a 128 países em 2011, quando é que você encontra as pessoas que estão dispostas a pôr dinheiro nessa empresa e falar, eu vou acreditar nela durante todo esse tempo? Então, eu acho que esse é um novo desafio que a gente não falava lá atrás, né, César? Eu acho que esse é um tópico que tem que entrar na pauta da animação. Tem que ter investidor em empresa, não só investidor em projeto. Né? Não é só a lei de incentivo, na lei do audiovisual, então eu vou lá na empresa e falo, olha, ao invés de você ir pagar imposto, você põe o seu dinheiro no meu projetinho, por favor, e eu vou te dar uns convites para o lançamento. A gente precisa mudar isso daí, senão a gente não sai dessa dependência do incentivo, que é para criar a indústria, mas não para sustentar a indústria. Né? Isso significa que, se a gente tem investidores, a gente vai ter que ter gestores, a gente tem que ter gestão não só de animação, né, quando a gente fala de line producers, produtores executivos, mas gestor de pessoas. Fazer uma coprodução com a Austrália, a Espanha, né, ou com qualquer outro país, significa conviver com cultura diferente, com processos diferentes durante 4, 5 anos. E a gente precisa ter gestão, precisa ter projeto. E, às vezes, essas palavras assustam os artistas ou os animadores. Não, gestão, né? Mas a gente precisa se aproximar se a gente quiser realmente criar essa indústria. E, obviamente, comercialização. Aí entra a história da distribuição. No começo do ano, teve aqui no Rio o evento aqui da BPI, e teve uma palestra do Zé Padilha, do Tropa de Elite. E ele fez uma apresentação muito clara sobre a diferença do Tropa de Elite 1 e a Tropa de Elite 2. O Tropa de Elite 1 ele fez a distribuição tradicional, através de uma major. E o Tropa de Elite 2 ele fez a distribuição própria. Agora a gente está falando um pouco de cinema. E ele falou uma coisa que eu concordo perfeitamente. Nos Estados Unidos, o distribuidor fica com dinheiro, mas nos Estados Unidos, o distribuidor é que corre o risco. Ele coloca o dinheiro para fazer os filmes. Então, a Disney, a Paramount, a Universal, eles colocam muito dinheiro no filme. Então, eles arriscam. Aqui, o risco é do produtor. Ele tem que fazer o projeto, ele tem que aprovar na Ancine, ele tem que bater nas empresas, ele tem que levantar o dinheiro, ele tem que viabilizar, tem que fazer toda a produção. Aí o distribuidor vai lá, tá bom, vamos lá. E aí a receita da bilheteria vai para o distribuidor, ele faz toda uma contabilidade e ele não corre o mesmo risco. O risco não é proporcional. Então, falando de animação, a gente também tem que incorporar o conhecimento de distribuição, senão a gente não resolve essa equação. E outra coisa que eu falei muito de cinema, uma coisa que eu critico em relação ao cinema brasileiro é a falta de diversidade. Diversidade de temas, principalmente, de técnicas, de linguagem, né? E eu acho que a gente pode, na animação, evitar que o mesmo ocorra com nossa indústria. Isso significa que a gente precisa ter empresa que é 2D, empresa de 3D, empresa de stop motion, empresa que faz para adolescente, que faz para televisão, que faz para novas mídias, que faz aplicativo para o iPad, que faz curta-metragem, que faz webisode em animação. Se a gente começar a ter essa diversidade, isso também promove a indústria. Senão a gente corre o risco de todo mundo não quer seguir. Então, como é que é? O caminho é série de TV, 52 episódios, 11 minutos, eu vou para o MIP, que eu faço o pitching. A gente não quer dizer que você não possa fazer isso, mas se a gente tiver todo mundo fazendo o mesmo trajeto, a gente não diversifica, e isso não cria uma indústria rica, né? Nada errado nas empresas que fazem work for hire. E a gente tem boas, inclusive, tem o Haroldo lá da HGN, que já trabalhou para a Disney. Né? Mas, se a gente quer se posicionar, a gente vai ter que ter os criadores de propriedade intelectual que, de repente, vão contratar as próprias empresas brasileiras de work for hire para fazer animação. Então, essa complementariedade também vai surgir se a gente tiver uma indústria diversificada, né, de temas, de público e de plataforma. Bem, tudo isso só para fazer a introdução à conversa. E, na verdade, eu também quis mostrar dessa forma, para que agora eles vão falar individualmente seus históricos, e a gente possa, depois, quando der essa primeira rodada, fazer essa conexão da experiência deles com a nossa situação atual e ver o que a gente pode, onde a gente pode melhorar a nossa indústria. Obrigado. Becky, you want to go first? Kevin?
Okay, obrigado. I'd like to, first of all, apologize to all of you for making you wear these headsets for the sake of the few of us who don't speak Portuguese. My colleague Wen is going to meet you halfway by speaking English instead of Chinese, but I have no excuse, so I apologize. I'm sorry. I'd like to thank our friends, Aida, Cesar, Leah, Marco, for having us here to Anima Mundi, Reynaldo for inviting us to this forum. It's been a real honor to participate. We've had a great time in Rio so far. Is it Caipirinhas? I can't even say it anymore. I had 2 for lunch, so, and 1 for breakfast. So I can't say them, but I enjoy them immensely. It's been wonderful to be here in Rio. And been very impressed with the work that we've seen, quite inspired, frankly. There are people in this room who we talked to this morning at Anima Business, and I think that as a general observation, some of what might be considered the limitations, perhaps, of the Brazilian market, maybe even some of the frustrations of the Brazilian market, you have seemed to turn into sources of strength. And the level of passion that we saw from the creators this morning, the level of creativity, the unique quality to the properties that we looked at was quite impressive. So I would encourage the local networks who I know perhaps are not currently participating editorially in advance on properties to be maybe a little more brave and have a little more confidence in the work of their hometown Brazilian animators, because it really truly is, I think, of an international quality. Yes, I think we should connect. So while we're waiting to connect, my colleague Wen and I will give sort of a combination presentation, a little bit of background on ourselves individually. Oh, no, thank you. And then some information on our company, Magic Dumpling. Just give me 1 second to switch over. Oh, sorry. My fingers are not working anymore. Yes, it was. They're quite good. It's like a mojito on steroids. Really. Okay, all right. So, Okay, finally. Magic Dumpling Entertainment is a company that we founded in Beijing in 2009. We are just under 2 years old at the time, a relatively young company. We focus on animation content development. So our business model is not actually to function as a production studio, but to function as essentially a think tank for the development of animation content, design, story. We then will work in partnership with studios in China to develop the... Yes? Oh, okay. More close to the microphone. Just like Michael McDonald of the Moody Blues. There we go. That's so much better. But now I can't see my screen. That's okay. So we focus on animation content development, and we work in partnership with production studios in China, in Taiwan, for the creation of that content. To fund our production, the development of what will go into production, we will also do essentially what amounts to insourcing. We will do work for hire, design and story work for other individuals, other companies, as seed funding for our own IP that we develop. And we also will provide business development services to American companies who are looking to make inroads into the China market, and also Chinese companies who are looking to make inroads into the international market. Companies who may need some guidance in how to write a business plan that is understood in the West, or to create a Bible that is something that an executive at Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon would accept as a standard format. So this is how we operate, and what we're going to do for this presentation is kind of skim over the surface. There's a lot to talk about in terms of what we do and our experience in China. We'll give sort of the broad strokes, and then hopefully touch upon things that can come up as questions during the Q&A. And the business model in detail will be kind of sprinkled as well throughout our presentation in the form of some answers to the questions that Reynaldo, Cesar, and others had posed in email exchanges prior to this presentation. The three core founders of Magic Dumpling, myself, my colleague Wen from Taiwan, and then our associate Yanni, who is from Beijing. We all currently live in Beijing. We have a branch office in Taipei, and we'll soon open one in Los Angeles. But we bring really, I think, an international triangle of points of view, backgrounds, and experiences to the table. And that's one of our strengths, I think, in terms of how we function as co-founders and operators of the company. Just very, very briefly, in terms of my own background, Wen and I will share some of this so you get an understanding of where we come from as creators, as proprietors of this company. My own background was as a fine artist. I spent my early formative years as a painter, an abstract painter, and as a sculptor, and eventually moved into computer graphics. I was at Ohio State University, the ACAD program. People such as Chris Wedge, John Donkin, who came from there and now work at Blue Sky, where Rio came from. I followed shortly on their heels, so there was a big influence from their work even that early on in terms of the inspiration to me as a young computer artist. Following graduation from Ohio State, I worked in visual effects at Boss Film Studios on a film called Species. This was CGI effects for a live-action film. And quickly after that, moved to the Walt Disney Company, where I started out at the bottom as a CG modeler, worked my way up to an animation supervisor on a pretty interesting variety of films. Disney at the time had recently acquired DreamQuest Studios, which was a visual effects house. And so within one company, I was able to work on more broadly cartoony styled properties such as Fantasia, and also photoreal films such as Dinosaur. I also worked on a number of films for 3 or 4 years which never made it into production. I was fortunate to be involved in what they call digital visual development, and this was my first sort of foray into the territory of development and sort of the perils of working on something that is very exciting and very fresh and very beta, you might say, in a computer sense, but also very volatile in terms of whether or not it will make it to the screen. Following that, Reign of Fire, and then wrapping up on Chicken Little, which is where I really got the most in-depth experience in terms of structuring a show from beginning to end, hiring, training people, pipeline, workflow, organizational principles. That feature animation production probably stamped me the most deeply in terms of my understanding of feature film, feature animation, film production. I also, during this time, did my own independent work. I did a short film called Henry's Garden, which actually screened here at Anima Mundi. I think it was 2003, perhaps, that it was here in the festival. And also was involved in, I guess, what you might call community services. We had an organization in LA called the Animation Co-op, which brought independent animators together to share ideas, pitch to each other, collaborate, debate, get drunk. It was really, that was probably the last one, probably the most popular aspect of the services that we provided. And this all led me eventually to leave Disney. I started to get itchy after 12 years there and wanted to expand my horizons. So I left the company, started consulting around the world at different countries, ranging from Europe to the Middle East and Korea, eventually ended up in China. And China is where I've been now for the past 3 years, the last 2 with Magic Dumpling. It's been a pretty wild ride. It's sort of like the new Wild West. It's a messy environment. It's very chaotic, as you'll probably get this message from Becky also when she speaks. But there is opportunity within that mess. And we're not trying to compare China to Brazil. I think the lessons learned of how to function in China might, in some indirect way, apply to Brazil. But of course, they're very different markets. But hopefully, by comparison, there will be some lessons learned which may be of some value to you as we speak. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Wen, who will talk about her own path to Magic Dumpling.
Hello, everyone. Sorry for my poor English, and so honored to be here. And for the past few days, we have the most amazing experience here. And I have a short introduction of myself compared with Kevin. My resume very short, but the similarities. I also begin with some independent film. I major in multimedia and communicate art in college, and have some experimental film when I was a student, and try different material. And I really have a passion of animation, and this morning, Lo's meeting also remind me like why I choose this career, and because I think animation is the way to express ourselves in many different ways. But later, after school, I focus more on some children's show, education animation, and recent year, I teach in Beijing Film Academy, have read some book, and also most focus on development and for different media, including TV animation, feature, and maybe online content. So today we will share some experience like we have in China, but I think I already see some similarity, like in common. I think we all love Hollywood film, but at the same time we hate it, right? We need to survive. Just a few days ago, I and Kevin talked about it, and he still saying, "Oh, Hollywood is the top one in the world."
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah. But I think today we will have some discussion of how we do our own film and to go into international market. But think about, actually, I think American filmmaker, you never think about you want to go into international, right? Because you are international. But as Chinese, we keep thinking about what's Chinese film today, but like other country, any human being can understand, will love it. And I think today we would like to share some thought about this aspect.
One of the first questions that we had posed to us before we came here was how to face the demands of the international animation market. And I think this is an area where, of course, it represents the holy grail for everyone. This is the promised land of success for animation, is to have a film, have a TV series, have an online property that is watched, enjoyed by people around the world, and that you reap the revenues that are quite necessary, as Ronaldo said, to get the return on investment from around the world. Animation, of course, presents great opportunity. You probably can't read this from that little screen, but it's okay. Essentially, the appeal of animation spans all demographic quadrants. It has an international level of appeal. It appeals to young and old, male and female. Animation properties very naturally lend themselves to the cross-promotion and the merchandising, which might sound crass and commercial, but again, is truly necessary to bring the return on investment needed to at least break even and hopefully turn a profit on what you're doing so you can keep making more animation. We've seen that the market potential of stereoscopic theatrical exhibition and even stereo TV is booming. There's a complete revolution online that is taking place. And particular to China, every territory has their own sort of special feature or asterisk of note at the moment. For China, it's the fastest growing animation market in the world, and it's also one of the most aggressive and profitable 3D stereo markets in the world. It recently moved up into the #2 position behind the United States in terms of the stereo market for theatrical feature films, and I believe Kung Fu Panda 2 actually showed on more 3D screens in China than it did in the United States during its recent release. Part of this is due to the fact, quite frankly, there's a lot of people in China. So really, as soon as the Chinese put their attention to anything, they quickly become the fastest growing market of that thing. It could be making pans, it could be making shirts, whatever. As soon as they get into it, they really go at it, and you see a boom in that area. So China is a territory that gets people's attention for the workforce that's there, but also for the market that's there. However, there are issues. Some of these issues are common to all of us. Globally, there are downward pressures on budgets, returns that we're all experiencing, no matter what country you come from. In China in particular, there are, this isn't to beat up on China, but quite honestly, substandard animation business practices, an emphasis on quantity over quality, that, in our opinion, constrain the potential of what is possible for that country. And we see signs of this changing. We're trying to do our little part to help change it, but it's slow in coming, and it takes its time. Conversely, there are Chinese studios that quite honestly want to do better and want to improve and want to engage but don't know where to begin. And there are Western studios who want to get into the market in China but have very justifiable concerns about, dipping their feet into water that at the very least they might get their feet dirty and at the worst get chewed off. So there is a real need for sort of a cooperation and an opening up, and we've seen this happening. Becky has been in that territory much longer than we have, and will also, I think, speak to this. When you're talking about international engagement, there are two basic roads you can take. There's insourcing. In America, we call it outsourcing because it goes out. Everywhere else, they call it insourcing because it comes in, versus original content, IP development. And this is a point that we actually have to hammer on a lot in China, but here I think it's clear you've already got it, that insourcing, while it might seem appealing initially, quickly can become problematic. It brings in short-term revenue. You can improve technical knowledge and skills. You can build certain relationships with overseas studios, but it's low reward, it's low risk, low reward, and it can move to another region without warning. You're constantly being underbid. You're constantly being compared against people who can do the same thing faster and cheaper, and so it's a losing game ultimately. What we believe is a much more fruitful path is original IP, intellectual property development. Now, of course, this is not without its challenges as well. It requires capital. It requires creative knowledge and skills. It promotes relationships with overseas studios, but on a more equitable level. So you are more of a partner and less of a servant than you are under the insourcing model. It's high risk, but also high reward, potentially, and IP is forever, at least until you sell it off and you liquidate and monetize it. But it's something that you own, and you are not a servant of the world, but you can potentially be a king of the world. And this is the area that I alluded to before, and Reynaldo mentioned quite pointedly that the challenges that you have faced in your own market in essentially having to function with an international model just to be viable within your own domestic market have, I think, been to your benefit. because the relationships, I've just been talking to people this morning and yesterday at the cocktail party, people who are functioning in co-production relationships with Canada, with other parts of the world, where you are not just their pair of hands, but you are a shared brain, right? You are a collaborator on a creative level, I think, puts you ahead of the game. So this is something that we're definitely going to be taking back with us to talk about to our colleagues in China and our partners there, because I think it's really to your credit here in Brazil and in Rio. So what we focus on at Magic Dumpling, given this, is intellectual property development, and Wen is going to take you quickly through some of the projects that we have on tap. Much like Reynaldo advocated, we have multiple irons in the fire, and Wen will take you through some of those now.
Just like you as a filmmaker, when we established Magic Dumpling, our goal is very clear. First, we create original IP. Second, we try to be international. And very quickly, actually, international become a concept we need to define. What's international? In the beginning, I think we compare it with Hollywood standard. But in China and maybe other countries, it have many reasons it's difficult. First, budget cannot compare with Hollywood. And even though you have many talent, you have many equipment, but the market not as mature as Hollywood. So actually our concept of international become like, we should take care of domestic market first. You make your own people love your film first. And then when your development, we have some principle how to make it have international potential. But your people need to love it first. And then if it's lucky, it can go into international market. And so just like Miyazaki have said, when I make my animation, I never think about other countries' audience. I only think about my neighbors' children when they love it or not. And so for the past around 2 years, well, we have at least very high standard for our own, that we want to make it our own film international. And become now like, we want to make something Chinese audience will love it, and also other people can understand and they will appreciate. And so the basic thing is, it shows contents on our own culture. I think it's the same in any country. We don't want to make a film that when you show it on screen and no one can tell where it comes from, and maybe from Hollywood or maybe it can be from any other country. I think maybe it's special in China because China have a very long history, and we have some old story and some our own choice of color, some pattern that unconsciously we will show it on screen. So there are some example have a successful domestic market first, and then Hollywood distributor pick it up. And I think for us, it's quite fit our situation in China now. Like this Baby Wolf, in the beginning, you can see it's not very high quality, but the story relate to modern life, like Chinese children, what they do every day, including this big wolf actually represent a good husband. He very afraid his wife, very take care of his wife. And it begins with around 500 episode TV series. And then finally become a feature, but have the highest box office in Chinese theater. Another example is Legend of a Rabbit. The director is the dean of animation school in Beijing Film Academy. So this film is by a private animation studio, make it for 3 years. And it begins with a 5 minutes teaser. They invest themselves and make it for around half a year. And just by this trailer, it sells more than 60 countries. So it's how, because as you know, Chinese market have some government support, but at the same time have some limits. And so every studio try to figure out how to raise the quality and how to make the content become international. And we see those examples still have a root in China. And we will talk about very soon about when we develop story and the design, you have some principle to make it have a potential to show it to other country, and it's what our company now trying to do. So for story development, we try to do some local legend or some original story, but emotions need to be understood by any human being, no matter what kind of culture, what kind of language. But the imagination should relate to our own culture and have some fantasy, because it's the basic specialty of animation. And so because we try to make our content have some international potential. So from story, we do it in both language. So for some humors, for some emotions, it need to be understood no matter where you come from. And cannot avoid, as the animated feature, we still take Hollywood structure as a reference, because it's the place like make storytelling like how to say
there's like, I guess, a successful template or standard in a way for the structure of the story.
For the past 100 years, so many people have studied, and so indeed, if we want to make it international, we need to use some rules of it. And for character, we will consider design including some Chinese beauty, including color, including shape. And this morning, we have seen some projects, very charming, have a Brazil specialty. Maybe the creator not even notice, but for us, it's very, very charming. And we love something you see come from Brazil, but it's also very modern, also relate to our life. And so for design, for the look, we hope to contain some local culture. But the character personality, we will try to relate to, no matter it's animals, life, or Asian time, it should relate to the modern audience. So it's some example of our design. It's Tofu Boy. It's an animated feature, and the log line is like a Pinocchio. Chinese Pinocchio. So it's very quickly to be understand the story plot, and also it's this little tofu boy can transfer to a different form. So you can see thinking tofu when he get angry, and also he will, when he cry, he becomes soy milk. Yeah. So we choose this topic first of all because Chinese food quite popular in the world, and the tofu is the one thing you cannot miss. So it's we hope it already have a very universal understanding, including it, and for it's a little boy, but we also hope the look and the background have many Chinese flavor. And when we decide development our story and character, we try to think it have a potential to become many, many different merchandise. So we need to think every project like a brand. And so no matter it's to 2D, 3D toy or online contents, it can have a little adjustment, but show the same charm of these characters. So there's some example of our project. And would you want to talk about some?
Sure, I can just mention these very quickly in the interest of time. So we have a slate of maybe a half dozen projects currently in development. Some are in development, some are in pre-production. One is actually in production at the moment. Snowball is an animated feature film set in Western China. I'm just going to be very brief here. But this is a 3D film, although the development that you're looking at is 2D. Probably one of the more traditional projects we've done and also the earliest. Stone Cold Lion is an animated TV series. It's sort of Stone Lions meets Dumb and Dumber. And the premise there is that it's based on the stone lions that you see everywhere in China, in front of restaurants, banks, etc. And these two particular ones have violated the rules of stone lions, which are don't move and don't talk. So they've been fired from the family business and have to rent themselves out as temp workers. So every episode is basically their failed attempt to hold down a job at any given location. And Tofu Boy, when mentioned, is a 3D stereoscopic film that we are currently working on. The script is going into its second version and of Chinese and its first version of English. And Zoo Crew is an anime-styled TV series about a group of teen heroes who fight evil with these cybernetically enhanced animal partners. And I think you get a sense here of what we try to do at Magic Dumpling. We don't have a house style, and this is very intentional. We have a core team of about 10 people, about 10 more freelancers who we work with regularly, and we try intentionally to have an eclectic style in terms of the visuals and also the age range and so forth, so that we're targeting children from preschool up to tweens and trying to have a range of expression in terms of how we manifest these projects. This is probably the most adult project that we're doing, and much like Ronaldo mentioned, it was the most recent development, and it's also the one that's in production now, oddly enough, is Dr. Sun. It's an animated series, I'm sorry, it was an animated series, it's now a feature, based on the revolutionary adventures of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who, if you're having trouble placing him exactly, if you remember Bertolucci's movie, The Last Emperor, he's basically the guy who was responsible for The Last Emperor being the last emperor. So, it's the best way I can put it. But the approach we take here is to focus on Sun Yat-sen and some of his colleagues as almost like this team of superheroes in a way, not to sound disrespectful, but this fantastic five of key players. There were many, of course, but these key figures in history and what were their personal stories during that time, and trying to make it cool in a way that tweens and teens can relate to. So, on that note, cultural differences are something that have to be accounted for. The impact of cultural differences has pros and cons, and I'll turn it back over to Wen for a minute to talk briefly about just some of the high-level issues that we faced in China relative to, let's say, Hollywood or the West.
China now is the market that many other countries pay attention because it's huge, but also have some limit and a lot of cultural difference. Kevin have many personal experience of it. And there are some very obvious rules. For example, China for movie every year only can import 20 foreign film. And so we talk about today's topic including co-production. And it's very important for Chinese market because if you co-production with a Chinese company, you will not be limited by these 20 film rules. And so China is a market you cannot avoid, but it's so different and have its own many different standards. And I just talk about film, but also for TV, TV have a more restrict rules that protect local animation. So they're in the most important time, the program. Golden time.
The golden time or prime time in America.
Prime time cannot show any foreigner animation. Also, many countries also use co-production as the best way to go into Chinese market. So, when we talk about cultural difference. First of all, I think Chinese market is the very important part of animation industry globally, and to co-production with the local company can be a very important part of it. And
I think, you know, one aspect of this, of the cultural differences, is you never really know what people are going to think until you take your property out onto the road. So, for example, I've taken our properties to places in Europe, to different festivals, and sometimes the reaction will be very accepting, other times they'll be kind of standoffish and say, oh, we don't think that this is great, but we don't think the Chinese theme will do well in the German market, etc. Not to pick out the Germans in particular, but and you'll be surprised, but this is valuable. You need this feedback because it's very honest. We've had people who have said, oh, a series set in Beijing seems too Chinese to us, but this animated feature, Tofu Boy, set in Shanghai seems more cosmopolitan, just because by nature of the city, the environment seems more cosmopolitan. So Rio is a great example of, I guess, what you might call an American film that is set in Rio de Janeiro, and the colors and the textures and the culture is something that Americans do hunger for something different, but if it gets too different, then they get a little scared, or maybe it gets too far out in front of them. So there's constantly this balance between, are you boring people by showing them the same thing, the same structure, or are you getting away from them a little too much by maybe moving past their comfort zone? And again, we're glossing over a lot, but we'll try to leave room open here for some follow-up questions. Some of the questions that were posed were how to structure an animation studio to ensure continuous production. I won't talk too much about this. I know a lot about this from Disney, and because our current company, Magic Dumpling, is not a production studio, I won't speak to it directly from our current operation, but I will say this. We see a lot in China, for example, studios who want to be as big as possible. They're concerned about growing big, large, and powerful. But just like the dinosaurs, they can sometimes work against you. So I think the important thing is sustainability. This is something that Pixar has really been quite careful about and tried to make sure that they were growing at a rate that maintained their culture, maintained their standards of quality, and that the studio didn't get away from them in the way that, quite honestly, the Walt Disney Studio got away from itself in, let's say, the mid-90s, late 90s. When I was there. So, but I wasn't responsible, I swear. Or maybe I was, who knows. Anyway, I'd like to think I wasn't responsible. How to balance the long-term and short-term studio cash flow. This is sort of like a generic view of let's say, a number of projects at a studio over the course of 5 years. And this is just abstract sample of the production windows of, let's say, a few features, maybe some direct-to-DVD features of 2 years each, some online properties, maybe a couple television series. And this is not even taking into account what Ronaldo talked about, which is the returns. When does the money come back into your studio? So you have two problems here. Number one is making sure that you have enough work for your crew to stay busy with, but not too much work. You'll notice that in this case, there are never more than 3 projects going on at once, which is planned so that the crew is not overextended and burned out, but you're also trying to avoid gaps. And of course, this is an art, so sometimes something has to go into story turnaround or extra development, and then you have to debate, do we keep feeding the machine, as they say, in terms of moving something forward to keep the crew busy when you have a creative problem, or do you take it offline and try to work out those story and design issues and then deal with the problem of an idle crew? You also want to make sure that you're balancing your returns so that all of your return on investment isn't way out in the future, but you're getting some quick turnaround on some short-term projects. For us, this takes the form of doing, as I mentioned, some insourcing. We do some work for hire to support, to provide seed capital for our original franchise development. And what we try to do is get that development to a point that it attracts production financing so we can then go ahead and greenlight the film, move that forward, as for example is happening with the Sun Yat-sen property, and then hopefully at some point profits come in and maybe you can drop the work for hire. Work for hire is always tricky because it's a hard thing to drop. When it is bringing in money, it's difficult to kind of give that up. As far as the type of investors, pure cash investors, I've learned through painful direct experience, are not so interested in animation. In Beijing, for example, you'll sit by a person who will say, this looks like a nice little film, but why would I wait 3 or 4 years for, let's say, a 25% return if I'm lucky, when I can buy a building downtown and flip it in 3 months and double my money? And so as an animation producer, you often forget, you're not competing against other animation producers for investors. You're competing against real estate. You're competing against people who make aluminum. You're competing against asphalt dealers. There are other places that people can invest their money and turn it around. So the type of investor you need to look for is somebody who has the money but also has another motive, an ulterior motive, which hopefully is sympathetic with your motive. So what I mean is, for example, a very rich person who doesn't really need more money, but to give you a couple $1 million is like pocket change for them. And they get to be involved with the film. Maybe they have a love of movies, or do they just want to see their name as executive producer? That's actually a viable candidate for investor. Or it might be the owner, this a lot we see in China, of a production studio who has a building, they've got the equipment, they've got the people, and they're sitting there with no ideas. And for our company in particular, we try to be the gas station that fills that truck, where if we can provide the IP and they can provide the money and the resources, that can be a good marriage as well. So these are ways that we've found we have to start to think in our own case for the sake of funding these projects. Fostering creative teamwork came up as a question. When I was at Disney, this was something that was really emphasized, that from the top down, you see Randy Fulmer, a wonderful producer, just a joy to work with. This was on Chicken Little. And then Mark Dindal to his lower left, who was the director of Emperor's New Groove and also Chicken Little. That joy that you see on their face, that easy quality, the camaraderie really trickled from the top down. And I've seen this spirit just in the people who we've talked with here in Rio, and I've seen the absence of it in some studios that we've dealt with in mainland China. But it's very important to get that spirit, that fire in the hearts of everybody to get you through the hard times that inevitably come when you're working on these productions. When you're developing and training in-house talent, this was an improv exercise that I was leading in Zhengzhou. I like to show it because people believe that improv is impossible in China. It actually isn't. They get into it very quickly. And it's very important to keep a core team in-house who you cultivate, who you provide opportunities to grow and rise up through the organization, and then supplement that with either temporary workers or freelance workers who you can expand and contract your studio by a certain amount to deal with the growth of production and also the shrink of production. There are many factors in terms of this idea of a core team. Caste systems can develop in a company which are unhealthy. There are a lot of issues that I can go into detail about if you're interested, but I'll just leave that for now. And move on to the question that came up of the balance of technological and human investment in an animation studio. If you treat your employees like members of an assembly line, you will get a bad result. And you can watch films and tell whether the people working on it had a good time or a bad time making that movie. And technology is always going to improve. There's always going to be some new whiz-bang gizmo to help improve the animation processes. But at its heart, it's about people. It's about who you work with. At Pixar, I mentioned their philosophy regarding the growth of their studio. They also say that when they're looking for people, they're looking for people. How is this person going to be to work with? Not whether they have 1 or 2 great ideas, but what are they going to be like as a person, as a creator to work with day in and day out, year after year. That's the important thing to consider. So in that equation between technology and human resources, you should always put your attention first and foremost towards the human resources, I believe. Technology is changing animation production, distribution, and marketing. It's not really changing what it is fundamentally, but it's requiring us to continue to adapt. And this has been the case, I think, since the first moments of film and television. Currently, we are seeing, I'm going to skip over production organization. I dealt with it a lot. It bores me a little bit right now, and I think we're coming out of time. So I'll leave that for the moment and move on to what interests me more right now, which is the distribution revolution. New media applications are turning everything on its head. And this is an important point, I think, for you here in Brazil. And I think what also is happening in China. If you copy what is going on in America, you are copying a dying model. You are copying a model that has seen its better days and is changing. And very experienced executives in America currently are scratching their heads and wondering how to deal with the digital revolution, how to keep the pie that they have in their hands, but also grab a piece of that new pie. And they're all hoping to God that new pie is not going to be smaller than the pie that they've enjoyed. So this is something that is taking the form of transmedia franchising, of interactive convergence, and really providing new ways of seeing our content and breaking down the borders between television, between film, between comics, and really blurring those distinctions in a way that can be quite exciting for a young company, even if it maybe is a little terrifying for an older company. So, with that, I think a good example of all of this is Rio, and particularly the Angry Birds Rio on the bottom. You see the little bug advertising that. The ancillary properties that are associated with the content are super important. They don't have to be a crass imposition on the creative, but they can be a wonderful extension of that. And as we know, they're really necessary for financial viability. And this is a project that I think is a great example of a hometown hero, right? Carlos, making good in America and then bringing it back home to the people here. And I hope on that note that 5 years from now, Carlos comes back to Brazil, sets up a studio here, and really opens up some new opportunities on a feature level within Brazil. So with that, I'm sorry we've gone over a bit, but we want to thank you for your time. Obrigado. Hand over the video cable.
Hold this over. Hello, hello. Hi. Wow, that was a couple of great presentations. What a lot of information you just got from Reinaldo and Kevin and Wen. You are so lucky to have a pioneer in animation beating down all of the problems and laying out a road for all of you. You are quite something, Reinaldo.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Very impressive. And Kevin and Wen are doing something very courageous in China, and I'm sure they'll be successful. He's right. It's not an easy place to work, even if you are Chinese, and let alone when you're a foreigner. But, okay, so now I get to talk about me and my history. And I've been in animation for a very long time, and I'm one of those strange little people that maybe there's a lot of you out there, actually, that when I was 5 years old, that's what I want to do. I saw Fantasia, and that's what I want to do. And so my whole vision for my whole life was to get to a place where I could learn how to animate. Anybody in the audience have that experience? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought so. That's great. It's good to be weird, isn't it? And I was lucky to be accepted to Cal Arts when it was very young in 1993. Do you know who California Institute of the Arts is? That school in outside of LA. Leah Zaguri was a graduate of it, and that's where I met her. And also, first, before I get into this about me, I want to thank you for inviting me, Anima Mundi, to inviting me to this fabulous festival that I've heard about for such a long time and have wanted to come to for such a long time. It's wonderful to be a guest here. and to be able to meet all of you and be able to wallow in Brazilian animation and Rio and get to know some of you. And already I've met a lot of wonderful people I've enjoyed talking to. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that. So thanks so much. Now I get to talk about me again, but CalArts, an amazing place. And I was there in 1973 through 1976, and my classmates were Henry Selick, who was the director of Nightmare Before Christmas, and Coraline, and James and the Giant Peach, and Kathy Rose, who is an animation performance artist, avant-garde, and Glenn Keane, who I would imagine you know about him. He's the second group of 9 old men, or 4 old men, or however many old men from Disney. I keep wondering, well, where are the old women? I know they're there. Yeah. So it was quite a wonderful place for the people that you would get to meet. Brad Bird was there when I was there. He was a young whippersnapper that was running around making everybody angry all the time because he was such a brat. But he's vindicated himself. He's proven that he is a talented guy. And so after I graduated from CalArts, I went out and worked in the business as an animator. And then 3 years after leaving, I started my own little studio with a partner. And we did that for 5 years. And we were doing, it was the worst recession that the US had other than the one we're having now. So it was difficult to make a living then, but we found a lot of work. I had begun to animate on Tron, the first Tron, back in '79 before we started our studio, and then when we did, Disney gave us a lot of the matte work and some of the effects work to do on that quite amazing film. Has anyone seen the original Tron? I actually liked it better than the new one. Good, good. It was such an interesting look of the film. And I also worked on The Thief and the Cobbler, Richard Williams' film, animated on that. And I just, you know, in 38 years, you've done a couple of things. And I was a lot of TV. I did a lot of TV. I was nominated for an Emmy for directing on The Wild Thornberrys for Nickelodeon. And what else? Family Dog, that was produced by Steven Spielberg and Tim Burton. And Cramp Twins, which was a really fun project. We did it for Cartoon Network, and I was the creative producer and director on that show. We did 52 11 minutes of that. And that didn't get a great distribution in LA. There was some political problem between Cartoon Network UK, which is who it was for, and Cartoon Network LA. So it got a distribution, but it wasn't with Cartoon Network in the US, and it did get sold in all the other world markets, though, so it did well worldwide, and it was the #1 show in the British Isles for 2 years, the #1 kids show. So it was fairly successful. I still, to this day, not been able to have someone tell me what the problem was between the two Cartoon Networks. But after 20 years, just about to the day when I left CalArts, I found myself back at CalArts as a teacher. And that was pretty wonderful, teaching all those young, creative folks. And a year after that, then I was named the chair of the character animation program, which was even more amazing, because I had the whole program I could do with as I wanted. And so it was really fun and exciting to create a curriculum that I would have wanted to be able to partake of if I were a student, and that I did want to partake of before I even knew I was going to be doing that. An amazing faculty, and it's a big program. There were 170 students in that program. And everyone, I don't know if you know or not, but everyone has to make a film every year, a short film. And I am a firm believer in animation programs that do that, because what happens is, it's the difference between other schools that have team organizations in their programs. People don't get to learn the whole thing. And when you're doing a short film, how many out there are short filmmakers? That's great. That's really great. Because you guys are the ones that are really doing the interesting work, actually, because they're all so personal, and you put a big piece of yourself in every single one, and you really learn how to do it. And I think that's why there are so many CalArts people that are at the top of the field in animation. And right now, I'm so proud to say that so many of them are my former students. I don't take any credit at all, because they are all so talented. I just kind of maybe helped direct and disciplined and cajoled and nurtured. But can I bore you with some of my great students and what they're doing? Anybody know Mark Andrews, the name Mark Andrews? Yeah? Amazing story guy, just amazing. For those of you that don't know, anybody seen Iron Giant? The Brad Bird? Well, Mark wasn't he wasn't the head of story on that picture, but he was one of the lead story guys. And then when Brad went up to Pixar, he took Mark with him. And so Mark was the head of story on The Incredibles. So he had his name before the movie, just wild. And another student of mine, Lou Romano, who was a production designer on that film. And Teddy Newton, one crazy guy. Teddy was nominated for an Oscar this last year for Night or Day. He didn't get it. And Mark had been nominated for a short the year before, One-Man Band. And when was Cloudy Day for Pete? Yeah, partly cloudy, but Pete Song. It must have been this last year, actually. Anyway, there's like this triad of students of mine that have been nominated for directing their own features for Pixar. I mean, shorts. And I'm sure I think Pete Sohn is now working on a feature, developing a feature. I don't think they've greenlit it yet. But Mark's working on his first feature for Pixar. And probably 90% of the upper level animators are from my program and my kids. So I could go on and on, so I'll stop boring you about that. And that's just Pixar. And there's Don Hall has been directing the new Winnie the Pooh film that's just being released this week, I think, from Disney, and DreamWorks, and on. So it's really validating that there were so phenomenal kids out there that became adults and are now leading the industry. I'm really pleased about that. So after about 5 years of CalArts, I was really starting to pine for going back and doing my own work and making films and doing TV. And then that's when I did the Wild Thornberrys and the Cramp Twins. And then after that, I started thinking, you know, I think it's time. I want to go back to China, because I'd worked there for the first time in 1988 and got bitten by that China bug. And saw the potential and loved the people and fascinated by the place. So in '88, actually, I would go back every year and travel and meet people in China and talk animation and talk to TV stations and heads of universities, and everybody's very interested in doing something about it, but then it was way too early. So in 2001, a friend that I had made back then in '88 and I decided, let's try, it's time to see if we can get something off the ground in China. And then the economy crashed, and not a good time. But I found my way there as the chair of the Beijing University Digital Arts and Design program, and had an interesting experience there with the students. There were 50 of them, and they were master's degree students with really no animation background, and very few of them had any art background. But when I left 6 months later, they all were really animating quite well. They were some of the hardest workers I've ever seen in animation, and they would do everything I asked, and it paid off. It was quite wonderful. Then I began the studio that took over my life for almost 7 years. It was a little over 6 years, I think, in Beijing. And we started with 14 people. And I've got a little PowerPoint to sort of show you our progression of our small team of 14 and where we were in the studio. And then we were able to do enough to start to expand, and we needed a bigger place, and then we got this gorgeous space and the sort of the evolution visually of the place. We began as an outsourcing studio, and my intention of going to China was because I've always wanted to go there since 1988 to start something, but was to be able to, because with my training and my teaching background, I knew I could teach people. And I knew I could get the crews developed and raise their standard of work to be quite high. And the China rates, you could do a movie for a reasonable amount of money instead of $150 million. And so by doing that, you have the availability of more funds so that you can have more of a turnover of product and movies. But the partner that I got involved with, who had raised a small amount of seed money, was more about the outsourcing mind. And so I thought, well, that's a trainable way to get a business started. It's good for training people and then also developing a demo reel and showing a track record. So we did that, and we worked really hard, and I trained everybody. And we were doing quite well, and we got to a point where we were doing TV shows and a lot of things for free. That's something that I'm sure those of you who have small businesses, small studios, and those of you who are thinking about it, you'll probably do a lot of work for free because it helps give you, and if you do work for free, only do work that you think is going to be good on your reel, because that's the value that it brings you. And it also then, like Reinaldo was talking about, is starting to form relationships with people. Because once you start getting in with a client, then they have friends that are looking for good studios. And that's if you're going to go the outsourcing way. If I were to do that again, and I'm hoping to, one day in the near future, to start a studio again, because I'm no longer with that studio, I would do it slightly differently. Because outsourcing is a fact of life, as Kevin was saying too. You're going to have some down areas and potential down areas that you are going to need that cash flow. But it's very dangerous because once you have a money flow coming in, it's hard to let that go. And people say, well, we'll have a crew that will do the high-end work, and then we'll have a crew to do the low-end work. But the low-end guys always want to do the high-end stuff. And so you've constantly got this battling and jealousy and all of that going on within the studio. So what I found out, I thought, well, because I have a team of 2 other people that were ready to start a place, and we had a plan, and we had a property, and we have the whole thing that you need. And I thought, well, we have track records, because one of my partners ran the biggest animation studio, 3D studio in China. She was the GM for 6 years. And my other partner is a pretty well-known person. I thought, well, and with my track record in China, in a studio, and having had a successful studio, I thought, oh, it'll be so simple to find funding. Because we knew a lot of venture capitalists and a lot of people, hedge fund managers. And, they just kept saying, well, where are the numbers? How much money are we going to make? And, blah, blah, blah. And every one of them also said, you've got to do this. You've got to find investors, like Kevin said, that are passionate about investing in film, because they're the only ones that are crazy enough to do it. But it is, even the venture capitalists will say, it's high risk, but it's high pay. Look at Steve Jobs. Of course, did you all know that he was trying to sell Pixar the whole time that he had it? Yeah. He just got lucky that he didn't find a buyer. Boy, did he get lucky. So what we're thinking about doing now is to get a couple of jobs to get a small place going as outsourcing a series or 2. Because between the 3 of us, we have tons of people that are always saying, have you started it yet? Because we really want to send our work to you. And then get a cash flow, a track record, and then we will track the investors. And then we can take off with our IP. Because with Xing Xing, which was the name of my studio in Beijing, That's what happened. After 3 years, we attracted, well, we were always attracting investors, but finally one caught. And we got a $5 million investment. And so our plan was to go from outsourcing and start investing into IP. Well, my partner just got scared to death about investing into IP, so we never really spent that money, and it just kind of evaporated into daily costs. And that was sort of one of the reasons why I eventually decided, well, I think that's kind of my cue to leave and go do something else for a while. But it is possible to get venture capital, and then you can definitely start to fund your IP. But I think there's always going to have to be that not so much fun about the outsourcing thing. And frankly, outsourcing is just ghastly. You haven't ever done any of it, have you?
No.
Yeah, he's so lucky. You've worked so hard not to do that. That's really great. Because it's just a grind. And I came up with this saying when we were in the midst of it. It was, you know, cheap is just free. Actually, free is not cheap enough. It's amazing what people want you to do. So let me stop with that, and we'll save a lot of this for the question and answer. And let me show you a little of the work that we did at the studio. And then I'll show you my PowerPoint of what the studio looked like, because you know, I find that when I tell people I've got a studio, they have an entirely different image of what it is. Like it's a little hovel in the back alley of somewhere in China. And when people would finally come to visit it, they would just be, are you kidding? This is it? I had no idea. It was pretty neat, don't you think?
That was great.
Yeah. Thanks. I'll pay you later. Okay, so I don't think we have any sound on this, but I'll play this for you. This was this was the last project I did with the crew before I left. And I tell you, it was the most fun we had the whole time. There were about 15 guys working with us on this, and they were so excited about doing this project. They were just, and it was like Kevin was saying, you can feel it. You can feel when a group of people working on something have actually enjoyed it and had a good time. So this project, it never went anywhere. It was for Stars TV. But this was that project. And then there's another project in here that we did for Disney China that's Flash. And they're trying to find, Disney's having a hard time in China because they're trying to localize it. And so the China portion of Disney came up with this concept about the Disney characters in Chinese garb with an old folktale. And Lasseter said, no, we don't want to do that to our brand characters. So, like, okay, good luck, guys. So this is the Stars piece. It's kind of fun. The genesis was from a game, and they were wanting to make a TV show from it, but I don't think anything has ever happened. It's too bad the sound's not on because it's pretty fun. It was very simple to animate.
Laser stunners! Riot hose! Tear gas! Let's just do a lot of standing around and looking cool and putting gel in our hair.
And this was a promo for a friend of mine who had this game company, and they'd gotten the rights to this Robo-Sapien character, this little robot guy. And I think they did get the game to do. They pitched it to EA, and I think they're developing it right now. The studio is primarily 3D, in case you haven't guessed. But we did do quite a bit of Flash. This was for a feature that studio came to us, production, not a production, the development studio came to us and said, we've got this script, do you want to do it? You mean the whole thing? Yeah. So we got to do everything. I directed and pre-production, and then we did the production in the studio. But this was the kind of proof of concept, the little pilot that we did to show that it could be done. It's called Hero of Color City. But the sad story that goes with this is we lost this because of the crash. The company lost their money. They had done another film, and it didn't do very well, and so they used our money to do the P&A, the distribution and advertising. This is the Disney China piece that I was telling you about. So that's in the interest of time, that's what we'll see today. So let me show you my studio. We'll first get to see, let's see, there it is. I was lucky to be able to have a fairly steady stream of visiting artists come through the studio. It was amazing how Beijing is the center of the world. I saw people in Beijing I hadn't seen in years from here, from the US. And a lot of my former students are in Asia, and some have families in China or Hong Kong, and they'd always call me when they'd come and say, come on up to Beijing and give my guys, you know, a master's class. And so we had a lot of people, and a couple of people from the National Film Board. So one of the special people that we had was Caroline Leaf. Anybody know who Caroline Leaf is here? The sand animation and the drawing on, painting on the camera on glass and scratching on Animac film. I'd shown, actually the Beijing University students, I had taken them through a lot of her films and talked to them about her work and a lot of the other independent artists' work, and had shown my guys at the studio a lot of her work, and everyone is just mystified about how in the world does she do this. So she brought her sand from Boston and her film, her Animac scratch film, and she went through and she did a demonstration of the sand. And I've never seen a Chinese audience be so raptly involved. They were just all sitting there like this the whole time, trying to figure out, how does she do that without in-betweens? So it was a really fun evening. So there was Caroline, and then a student of mine, Mark Oftedal, who was one of the first group of animators that started Pixar. And he was one of the lead guys on Toy Story 1 and Bug's Life and Toy Story 2, I think. And he took his millions in stock options and turned in his stock, and has been living in Thailand for the last many years. And he came to China and did a talk at Beijing University and also at Xingsheng. And Todd Polson, who is an independent filmmaker and has done 3 or 4 shorts. He worked with Maurice Noble, who was this fabulous designer that worked with Chuck Jones for so many years and made all those great shorts. So he's become a really successful independent artist and designer. And this is Anthony Wong, who is, he was a 2D animator at Disney, and then as he saw the writing on the wall there, he started to learn 3D, and now he's doing 3D animation at Pixar. So he came for a couple of days and did a couple of classes and critiques on the animator's work. And then a Michelle Meeker, another student who had been an animator at Pixar and DreamWorks and worked on Golem and King Kong at Weta, and now is an animation mentor teacher. She came for a month, actually, and worked hard with the team to bring up their skills. And I don't know if David Ehrlich has made it to Anima Mundi yet. He's, has he? No? He's quite an educator and filmmaker himself. He's from Dartmouth College. He was visiting, talking to us about helping us with our school, our animation school at the studio. And he's sitting in my office checking his email. And then Janet Perlman and Joan Gratz and Judith Gruber-Stitzer. Judith Gruber-Stitzer did a lot of the soundtracks, the composers, composing of the soundtracks for the Canadian Film Board films. And I think she did the music for 2 of Caroline's films and a lot of Janet Perlman's films. So they came in and talked to the people. The 3 of them have been here. Doesn't surprise me. They're terrific. Okay, so now this will take you through the little bit of the step-by-step by the studio. This is kind of an indicator of how we started. It was with a bang, but it was this long, lonely hall with our future that laid before us. There's my little office there with Michelle working over in the corner, and it was pretty dull, normal Beijing design. My partner had gotten it set up before I got there, so I didn't get to do any decorating. And this was the early days. We just had a few people at this time. But then it started to fill up, and here's the 14 people that started it. And out of this part, this guy is still there. This guy is sort of there. He's part-time. He's still there. This was my partner. And that's it out of this. Oh, no, he's still there too. Then, it was about after a year and a half we were in that space. We were doing well enough that we started looking about in this great old space on the other side of Beijing. We were on the far west side and wanted to be over on the east side because it was more foreign friendly. It was actually food that you could eat and menus you could read. And we found this great complex. It was built by the, actually it was designed by the Germans and built by the Russians and given to the Chinese as war reparations.
Super fun.
Yeah. But it was idyllic. There were lots of pine trees in the area, and it was built like in a square. I guess it was almost like the Pentagon, only it did have 5 sides actually. It had this nice pond and pagoda and trees. It was very pleasant, basketball courts and tennis courts. And see, here's the square area that we were on. We were on this floor, the top floor. And then ultimately, we expanded so much that we took over this floor. And then we had half of this floor for the beginning of the school. So, and at the bottom floor is still a factory, because this was a huge factory area. They created electronics for the military. But most of the factories moved out and artists began to move in. But it was kind of cool having a working factory in the area. So this is what we walked into for our new space. And it's always fun, I think, to see how a space looked before it is what it is. So it was pretty rank. But notice these are sort of keys. And we ripped out all the windows. We ripped out pretty much everything, as you'll see. But it was a huge space, absolutely huge. Okay, so this is when we started tearing things down. And you can see this open space opened up and these big pillars. And I had them take all the plaster off the walls so we could see the brick. And it was quite a mess during this period, because they were doing the bathroom and putting in the mortar and stuff.
Nationally, TV broadcasters are, even when they do commission films, they are sort of loath to pay any kind of a decent rate for the properties that they're commissioning. And this is certainly true of China. It sort of relates to what Becky said. Broadcasters like CCTV, which is China Central Television, will pay rock bottom rates, and they really can afford to, because China Central Television, as its name would imply, is state-run, and so they can pretty much set the rules for how much they want to pay, when they want to pay it, and the programming is controlled very tightly. Now, having said that, the China landscape of TV broadcast is actually more varied than some people might think. There are different regional options for broadcast, and it's something, though, that really, to take advantage of properly, you have to have an inside contact in those networks, somebody who can help navigate your property so that you basically don't get screwed in the process of trying to get your work broadcast. But it really is essential for TV broadcast in mainland China to have those high-level connections. And even though you may not make money on the broadcast, much like international industry, you can make a good amount of money, even in the face of piracy, on merchandise and so forth. And China has this very strange cocktail of government incentives where you'll see TV series that are award-winning TV series that have never aired on television yet. You haven't even heard or seen these shows, and they have all these awards. And typically what happens is that there's some government funding that comes in the form of an award. Many times that money is kicked back to the government by the studio in exchange for the publicity that came with the award. It's a very strange sort of system, and you're starting to see this disassociation where the online space in China, which is not currently regulated as tightly as broadcast television is more free, and you're seeing some very edgy properties coming from overseas, but also being done locally that maybe are receiving no support whatsoever and are very grassroots, but are very funny, very creative. And I think that the future of Chinese television, of Chinese broadcast, is going to come from that space. And it remains to be seen if the government will clamp down on it or if they will let it flourish and try to take advantage of it economically. But it is a tough environment. It's a big environment, and there are possibilities there. That's why I'm still there. But it's pretty brutal, and many of the assumptions that people like myself walk in there with are quickly slapped away by the experiences that you have there. I don't know if Wen, if you want to add anything about broadcast in China, from your point of view as Chinese?
CCTV is the only TV station. If your animation show on this channel, every Chinese in different province can see, and so many animation studio will try to get their show on this channel, but not for selling. Sometimes animation studio pay CCTV to show their show, but if your show on CCTV and your book your toy can have maybe 10 or even 100 times of license fee than if you only show it in local regional channel. So just like other country for broadcast on TV now, the fee very, very little. But revenue will come from merchandise, and it's very obvious in China. Yeah. So even though CCTV very not reasonable, but it's the goal. You need to show on it, and then you have other benefit later.
Boa noite. Sobre o financiamento para produzir desenhos animados, eu já ouvi histórias que, por exemplo, o He-Man foi financiado por uma indústria de brinquedo que queria produzir bonecos, ou que o Popeye foi financiado pela indústria de espinafre. Então, nesse cenário de conseguir parceiros que investam dinheiro, o que vocês veem dessa possibilidade de um parceiro ter a produção de um licenciamento, de um brinquedo, enfim, se isso é uma possibilidade, como é que a mesa vê isso?
Bem, esse foi um dos motivos porque eu deixei de trabalhar para alguns estúdios, porque tem realmente esses casos, né? Tem uma certa série feita sobre peões que eles lutam entre si, e a ideia era desovar o estoque de peões, sem mencionar nomes, mas sendo óbvio. Então, realmente, no meu ponto de vista, eu costumo dizer isso, porque como eu venho da área de licenciamento, eu não sou contra o licenciamento, desde que ele venha depois da história. Primeiro o personagem, primeiro a história. E, claro, que o retorno de investimento venha com a venda para a TV, com a venda de produtos. Né? Isso é um assunto muito polêmico. Né? Eu costumo dizer que a própria Pixar, que é uma referência para todos nós, né? O Wall-E é um filme que trata sobre consumismo. Né? E quantos copos promocionais de bebida, de soft drink, em fast food eles devem ter feito, que vai exatamente contra a mensagem do filme. Então, mas eu entendo que isso é difícil de ter um total controle, porque muitas vezes as pessoas que estão na área da criação da história não estão na área da gestão do negócio. Então, é muito mais uma questão da coerência de toda a cadeia, de toda a organização, que é muito mais difícil, principalmente quando a organização é muito grande, do que numa organização pequena. Essa é uma das poucas vantagens de ser pequeno como um produtor independente, que a gente tenha o controle, que a gente possa escolher quais são as histórias e o conteúdo. O licenciamento vai fazer parte, principalmente com o que as TVs andam pagando para as séries. Né? A gente acabou de escutar um relato muito assim, que o canal quer que você pague para exibir a série. Isso não é novidade, isso não é só lá na China, não. Viu? Mas eu costumo dizer, bem, se você quer um pedaço, às vezes, do licenciamento, me dê um pedaço da publicidade. Senão a gente começa a inverter um pouco, né? O conteúdo atrai o anunciante vem por causa do conteúdo, enfim. Então, é verdade, sim, existem esses componentes, mas eu defendo que eles tenham que vir depois da criação da série. Analisar o conceito da série e falar, bem, o que tem sentido, né? O que uma criança pode se associar positivamente com aquela história, com aquele personagem. Mas essa é uma discussão realmente uma linha muito tênue e difícil mesmo, né? Não sei se eles querem complementar.
Actually, I have something I could say. Yeah. I'm working for Mattel right now, Mattel Toys. And I never really thought of working for a toy company before. But they've started to discover that getting content is a great way to drive their merchandise. So that's what I do for them, is I create their girls' content. Our division, it's called Girl, Boy, Girl Entertainment. And we've got a producer who does the boys' content, what is it, Max Steel and Battle Force 5, and there's a couple of others, Matchbook, You can tell I don't really pay any attention to what they do on that side. I have my handfuls with my side. But my property is Monster High. And it's been a real education for me because I had not been on this side of it before. And it's fascinating watching how it goes. And, you know, they haven't really had Barbie has been their property that has been, they've actually made money from the things they create, the DVDs, et cetera, not only just selling the Barbie dolls. But then they've realized through Barbie, wow, this medium can really help us bring more visibility to our products and sell more because of that. So one of my properties is Monster High. And it's this line of dolls, if you don't know what this is, and they're all children of famous monsters, of monster movies. And the dolls are fairly high-end dolls, and they're okay as far as dolls go. They're pretty. But the webisodes, and this is the thing that's so interesting, they've decided to go the route of webisodes. And Mattel is totally funding these, and they get no money back from this except for what the dolls sell. And through the webisodes, because it's supposed to be pitched at 5-year-olds to 9-year-olds, which it seems to me that it actually is a bit older. And I think the girls that buy the properties are definitely maybe 8 to 12. Because our stories are about girls that are maybe in early high school, late junior high school. And the stories are good. They're dealing with problems that girls have in relationships and with the boys, and there's really no direct pitching of a toy. It's just the matter that these are actors in this show that just happen to be dolls for Mattel. And I think we're starting our sixth webisode season, and I think the product has been going for 2.5 years. And it's really just been driving the doll up through the ceiling. They're being very successful. And I just think that's so interesting that it's not TV, it's a webisode, and it's on a website, and it's driving its own business. And it really doesn't cost anything for the platform. It certainly costs something to produce the webisodes. But now, last October, they did a half-hour or 22-minute special for Nickelodeon. And this year, we're finishing up a one-hour special for Nickelodeon on Halloween again. And next year, there's apparently 4 Friday the 13ths next year. So Nickelodeon wants an hour episode of Monster High for each of those Friday the 13ths. And ultimately, it's driving towards a TV series, but it hasn't quite gotten there yet. But I think it's so fascinating because it's a lesson that, like you say, you've got a property, and if you have this potential of putting the property out first or somewhat simultaneously so one can drive the other, it could be free advertising, really, for your product. So I think it's really something to think about because Mattel is a very smart company. Hasbro, their main competitor, has decided to take the other route, which is to buy their own channel. And I think they're finding it more challenging than they thought, creating all that content. So, you know, Mattel has kind of just been plodding along and growing, and the Max Steel movies are doing terrific in South America. The people in the US don't know who Max Steel is. But you guys get all the product, and it's pretty good. And the Battle Force 5, I guess that's on Cartoon Network, I think. Yeah. But I think they've just now canceled that. So I don't know where it's going to show up. But I know there's a website for that too, right? Probably. So anyway, it's interesting getting that perspective from the toy view. And I don't have too much trouble with it as long as they're not saying, hey, look at this toy in this episode. Isn't this cool? You buy it here. It's really not like that. It's even smoother, actually, I guess, is what that is, that it's the characters are about that. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in since that was appropriate.
Mais perguntas?
Aqui.
Oi.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Neila, eu sou professora da Universidade Federal do Piauí e desde o ano passado nós começamos a implementar uma disciplina que tem um pouco de fotografia e um pouco de stop motion. E eu comecei a participar de mais eventos relacionados a essa área para tentar levar também um pouco para os meus alunos. E só elogiando, assim, porque eu estou achando o máximo todo o evento. Quando você falou, Reinaldo, nos valores para uma série, eu fiquei de queixo caído. Porque a gente trabalha na universidade com a minha câmera, né, que é uma câmera semi-profissional, no meu tripé, fotografando os bonequinhos de massinha de modelar, que são massinhas infantis, do meu filho ou do filho de qualquer aluno lá. E a gente faz tudo em 4 meses no máximo, né? Porque são 2 meses de teoria, enfim, 1 mês, está todo mundo produzindo curtas de 1 minuto, 2, tem produções de 5 minutos. E eu fiquei imaginando como eu vou chegar para esses meus alunos, depois que eu voltar desse evento, e dizer assim, mas vocês querem ser profissionais na área, então vocês vão ter que buscar um financiamento, alguma coisa muito maior. E, de repente, chegar para um reitor da minha universidade e dizer assim, investe aí, 7 milhões, né, alguma coisa assim. Mas a dúvida maior é, na cadeia produtiva, o que é mais caro? É o profissional? O programa que se utiliza, o final, a produção, a distribuição, o que é mais caro?
Tá bom. Bem, vamos lá.
Muita coisa, né?
Primeiro, contextualizando, né? A série Princesa do Mar é uma coprodução internacional, significa que tem profissionais do Brasil, da Austrália e da Espanha. A maior parte na Espanha, onde foi o grosso da animação. A animação na Europa já é mais cara do que normalmente a animação em outros países que tem um custo de animação mais barato, mesmo que o Brasil, China, Singapura e tal. Só que a gente está falando, primeiro, o nível de qualidade de animação para um produto que seja vendido para uma Disney na Espanha, para uma Kika na Alemanha, é um nível de animação com movimento, com intervalação muito alto. Então, o produto final da animação, quando a gente diz um produto de nível broadcasting, que é para essa qualidade, ele realmente tem um valor mais alto. Aí você vai falar, puxa, mas valeu a pena o salário dos espanhóis que participaram da animação? Foi aquilo que eu contextualizei. O fato da série ter sido animada na Espanha tornou a série conteúdo europeu. E com as leis protecionistas da Europa, isso permitiu a série ser pré-vendida para a Alemanha. Então, por um lado, aumentou o orçamento, mas, por outro, viabilizou a venda para um país-chave, que é a Alemanha, que é um dos países que mais pagam. Esse é o outro lado da moeda. Se a gente for comparar quanto que uma TV Cultura, TV Globo, SBT paga por uma série, e quanto uma Nickelodeon nos Estados Unidos, uma Kika na Alemanha pagam, a diferença também é muito grande. Isso não quer dizer que não é possível fazer uma série com valores abaixo disso. Tá? Princesa do Mar é um orçamento médio para cima, em termos de comparação. Mas tem séries brasileiras de 26 episódios de 11 minutos, na faixa dos 5 milhões de reais, 6 milhões de reais. Se você comparar, é bem mais barato. Tudo bem que são 26 episódios. Esse é um dos outros motivos, porque muitas séries estão sendo feitas no Brasil com 26 episódios, ao invés de uma temporada completa de 52. Então, na verdade, essa questão do custo, e para responder a segunda parte da sua pergunta, 78% é a animação do custo. Então, o volume maior realmente é na etapa da animação. E olha que isso é um orçamento sem o marketing, sem a divulgação. Esse é o problema do cinema brasileiro. Quando faz orçamento de filme, faz orçamento para fazer o filme. E não põe o dinheiro para divulgar o filme. Então, como é que você vai levar as pessoas para o cinema se você não divulgar? Aí o produtor de cinema brasileiro faz um orçamento, faz um filme. Ufa, conseguiu dinheiro, paguei meu salário, vou para o próximo filme. Outro orçamento. E os filmes não viram produtos rentáveis. E a gente não cria uma indústria rentável. A gente cria uma dependência de orçamento e de lei de incentivo. É isso que eu estou dizendo que a gente precisa ficar atento para não criar o mesmo efeito na indústria da animação. Se a gente quer criar uma indústria, e por isso que eu estou falando, indústria, talvez os seus alunos, eles estão no estágio da experimentação, Então, façam curtas, façam projetos locais, de repente pequenos, o que a gente chama de interstitials, que são animações de 1 minuto, de 2 minutos, coisas mais baratas, para criar prática, para criar a curva de aprendizado. Mas esse patamar que eu estou falando é um patamar de mercado mundial de séries de 52 episódios de 11 minutos. E eles levaram 18 meses para serem produzidos, com uma média de 260 pessoas trabalhando simultaneamente. Então, é outro jogo, né? É um outro patamar. Respondi? Talvez o Kevin...
To add, it was an excellent answer, and I think that, the model, the business model that Reynaldo is showing is quite exciting, because rather than being something that might discourage somebody and think, oh, I need 7 million, the way I interpret it is that it's possible, it's still possible for somebody like Reynaldo to pitch a show, I'm very jealous actually, and to in relatively short order get it set up and to be able to achieve a budget like that and put together this kind of co-production. At the same time, and in the interest of the time, we glossed over it, but one of the technological advantages now is that it's also possible for people, individuals, to do very high-level work, to do things at their desktop, even on a little computer like this, that would require an entire studio before, and can also be quite successful and even profitable if you're looking to make a profit. So I think that it's a very exciting time, because this sort of, in a way, represents those ranges, right? The range that Reynaldo was working at with the Princess of Mars property, and also the level at which you can make some things relatively for free. I don't mean pirate software, but there are software packages out there that you can download for free, that are offered for free. There's so much that a small startup studio can do. I know one entrepreneur, he's not involved in animation, but he's involved with the creative field. And every time he starts a new enterprise, he disciplines himself to start with 5,000 USD. Even if he's made $1 million on his previous enterprise, he salts it away, and he forces himself to start with like around 5K, because he said it makes him think immediately about the business model, how to turn a profit, and to discipline himself. As Becky showed, the reverse of the 7 million that Reynaldo had is that you can get 5 million, and then slowly, through indecision or whatever else, kind of fritter it away, and you don't even realize it. It's like the death of 1,000 cuts, right? Where you're bleeding and you don't know it until you finally drop over. So sometimes having that money, if you're not ready for it, can be as much of a problem, and maybe more of a problem than not having that money. So I think it's great. I tip my hat to Reynaldo for that kind of a deal, and I think for your students this should be a very exciting time in terms of the range of options that are available.
Para mais uma, César? Tem mais uns 10 minutos, mais perguntas lá no microfone.
Boa tarde a todos na mesa. Meu nome é Bruno. A pergunta era para o Reynaldo, mas eu gostaria da opinião dos outros da mesa também. Quando a gente fala de filmes com temas adultos, a gente fica restrito um pouco à produção autoral com exibição em festivais como esse, ou uma divulgação no estilo faça você mesmo, divulgando por redes sociais, né? Você acha que isso é em mercados emergentes como o nosso? Você acha que isso é uma característica do mercado? Quando você fala no aspecto comercial, você parece que isso some, você volta para o universo infanto-juvenil. Você acha que isso se dá pelo medo de você arriscar numa coisa nova, como no Japão, por exemplo, onde isso é muito mais comum pela aceitação disso lá, ou isso ainda é uma ideia equivocada de que a animação não funciona bem para adultos?
Eu acho assim, É claro que tem mais mercado e quantidade de animação, falando de indústria, né? Falando de série, conteúdo, principalmente para televisão e cinema. Tem mais para criança do que para adulto. O que não quer dizer que não exista um mercado de animação para adulto. Então, a gente tem um exemplo no Brasil da MTV. Você tem animação feita para o público mais jovem, com um linguajar diferente e tudo mais. Se você for numa feira como o MIPCOM, que é uma feira que ocorre na França, é uma feira muito comercial, que não é só vendida animação, é vendido filmes, documentários, todo tipo de conteúdo, você vai encontrar compradores de animação adulto. E tem canais pelo mundo de animação para adulto. Então, é aquilo que eu coloquei na tela do ir para exportar. Você tem que ir para as feiras, você tem que buscar informação e entender quem é o público que compra, qual é o canal, quais são os canais que tem por aí. Então, é mais encontrar, bem, se esse é o seu produto, é o que você gosta, quem ou quais são os canais que estão dispostos a comprar esse meu conteúdo e fazer a conexão com eles. Então, respondendo do ponto de vista assim, tem mais animação infantil, sim, mas isso não quer dizer que não tenha espaço comercial para animação para adulto. Aliás, eu acho até que essa é uma tendência de crescer, porque, de certa forma, se a gente olhar o número de animações para cinema, elas vêm aumentando muito. E, claro que a própria Pixar, DreamWorks, tem um cuidado do que a gente chama de co-viewing, né? De que o filme sirva para a criança, mas também sirva para o adulto que leva essa criança. Então, de certa forma, a gente está reeducando esses adultos e essas crianças vão crescer e vão achar a animação talvez mais natural do que a minha geração, que tinha, sei lá, um longa-metragem de animação por ano ou a cada 2 anos. Eles vão quase que todo mês ver um longa-metragem de animação, né? Eu vejo isso com os meus filhos. Eles estão sendo educados com uma animação mais presente na vida deles, culturalmente, do que a minha geração foi. Então, acredito que isso vai repercutir neles quando forem adultos, aceitarem a animação. A mesma coisa com videogames, né? A gente teve uma época que os videogames estavam só para os jovens, e agora, quando você olha o mercado de animação, ele atende... Aqueles jovens já são adultos, então eles já estão acostumados. O game não é uma coisa tão inacessível, né? É uma coisa mais aceita. Então, eu acho que é totalmente possível, mas é uma questão de ligar o produto com quem compra esse produto. Right?
The one, and again, it goes back to the merchandising consideration. When a property ages up, when it's watched more by adults than by children, it can be a problem for the profitability of that property because less toys will sell. A good example of this is the Star Wars, the Clone Wars TV series, where critically, they were very proud of the fact that adults, young adults, old adults, were watching this series and that it was enjoyed by an older age group. Commercially, it was a little bit of a problem because even though adults do buy toys, many of us who animate have the tops of our workstations lined with toys, although with flat panels it's getting trickier than when we had CRTs. Less real estate. The fact of the matter is that children will buy toys more obsessively, and you combine the obsessive, undisciplined child mind with their parents' wallet, and you have quite an attractive economic prospect for the toys, and that is a little bit less so when the primary viewing audience is adults. So this isn't to say that as creators, we're big fans of adult animation, but you have to make sure you take into account, that your business model takes into account how you will recoup your return on investment, and be realistic about the fact that, okay, we may sell fewer toys. Does that mean we'll make it up in the area of clothing or maybe collectibles, urban vinyl, as you might call them, higher end dolls? What is going to be the business model for recouping? And I should say something about this, because Reynaldo made a good point that really the creative core of the property is the most important thing. And in our own presentation, when we talk about designing for branding, etc., if you march into a network and start immediately talking about your business plan and your merchandising strategy, and you'll see this in China where people will have, like, in Photoshop, they've taken cups and T-shirts, etc., and they just kind of stamped their character on all of these products that they grabbed off the internet. It becomes very ridiculous very quickly, and broadcasters see through that right away. If you have a good property, they will immediately catch on to the merchandising potential. They will have professionals who will know way better than you how to monetize this. It's good for you to show that you have an understanding of that business, but you definitely don't want to lead with that foot. I think you always want to lead with the creative foot first and put the best idea out there that you're the most passionate about. That's always going to be your best business plan.
Olá, meu nome é Gabriel. Eu sou produtor também, eu estou pleiteando isso. Estou terminando um primeiro curta-metragem agora. E estou chegando a um momento onde eu quero fazer um próximo projeto que seja algo comercial. Nem que seja algo pequeno, mas que é algo que eu possa vender. E você falou no início que estava criando a sua série sobre essa coprodução entre algumas produtoras aqui do Brasil e outras lá fora. E eu queria que você me falasse, assim, do ponto de vista, falando para alguém que vai começar isso, quer entrar na jogada, qual a importância de você trabalhar com outras produtoras e já pensar num primeiro projeto para vender lá fora, já que você disse que é importante isso para financiar toda a produção, né? Então, eu queria que você me falasse um pouco sobre como é que foi essas parcerias, assim, e qual a importância disso. E se dá para começar a fazer isso de início, assim.
Está falando de série de animação para TV, é isso?
Série,
Tá. É porque tem um caminho um pouco diferente. Eu acho que a primeira pergunta é assim, o que você quer realmente fazer? Você quer ser o roteirista, você quer ser o dono da história, você quer se juntar com pessoas que têm uma técnica que você admira, ou você domina essa técnica, mas não é bom de roteiro. Aliás, acho que esse é um dos maiores problemas dos animadores, de forma geral. Não estou dizendo que não tem exceções, mas precisa ter essa noção de que só porque você faz o character design, você não necessariamente é a melhor pessoa para escrever os diálogos daquele character, né? Uhum. Ou seja, tem que ter essa complementariedade. Se você está falando de montar uma empresa do começo, não junte com os amigos da faculdade só porque eles são legais. Junte com turmas que você perceba que tem a mesma sintonia de propósito do que querem lutar nos próximos anos, porque, como você viu, é uma longa jornada. Então, se forem desejos muito de curto prazo e diferentes, isso tende a não dar certo, né? E se existe esse desejo comercial, quem é a pessoa que tem essa competência comercial? Ela vai fazer parte dessa sua empresa ou você vai se associar com alguém que já tem essa competência, né? Um bom começo é fazer o pitching da sua ideia para alguma estrutura, seja uma empresa brasileira ou uma estrangeira, que vai abraçar o seu projeto e, com essa competência já implementada, vai executar. E aproveite para aprender com essa experiência, porque na próxima talvez você já esteja num outro patamar. Então, existem vários caminhos, mas eu acho que a pergunta principal é: aonde você se vê daqui a 5 anos nesse papel, né? Porque, como ela é uma jornada longa, você tem que ter essa clareza. Eu quero ficar animando. Não, eu quero pegar essa ideia e transformar num projeto realmente para ser visto. O que falta? Para quem que eu procuro? Né? E procure conversar, porque acho que no Brasil, esse estágio agora, 2011, é muito diferente de 2004, quando não tinha com quem conversar sobre isso, né? Vai conversar com o pessoal. Você é da onde? Daqui? Vitória. Aproveite esses eventos. Quando ele falou do networking com os estrangeiros, não é só o networking dessa turma aqui, é o networking dessa turma aí. Né? Deve ter alguém lá de perto, ou alguém que tem um projeto, né? Procure conhecer essas pessoas, porque aí é que eu digo que talvez vão surgir as próximas coproduções brasileiras. E os canais de TV do Brasil, eu acredito que vão ter uma tendência de estarem mais abertos a esse tipo de projeto, né? Eu tenho uma grande esperança que o Sítio do Pica-Pau Amarelo vai ser um case de sucesso que vai mostrar para outros canais, puxa, a Globo fez o Sítio. Será que a gente não pode fazer uma animação brasileira com um estúdio brasileiro ou com 2 estúdios brasileiros? Então, eu acredito que essa é uma possibilidade real de acontecer.